such a web of life, and every species has such an important part to play, like the strands in the web.
And these species have all co-evolved, and this is just a natural cycle. It's occurred, it's been going on since long before we were on this continent, and it's natural.
These birds are naturally occurring. They've come back to repopulate areas where they existed previously.
They've been around a long time, and they are a part of the Great Lakes ecosystem. It's constantly changing. It's constantly, species have their heydays and then they fall off, they come back.
It's just nature unfolding the way nature is supposed to do. The natural state of a lake island is to have colonial water birds nesting on it. That's the diversity. That's biodiversity. Bio meaning life, diversity meaning different kinds of life.
The ultimate goal is the protection of the Great Lakes ecosystem as a whole, including all of the native species, and one of those being cormorants.
The diverse waterbird colonies that flourish throughout North America's Great Lakes represents an exceptional success story in today's imperiled natural world.
Presqu'ile is actually one of the most diverse habitats in all of the province. The Gull and High Bluff Island themselves constitute the biggest and most diverse colonial bird grouping in all of the Great Lakes on either the U.S. or Canadian side. 3 species of herons, 3 species of gulls, 2 species of terns, and cormorants. They've been around a long time, and they are a part of the Great Lakes ecosystem.
After being nearly decimated by the widespread use of DDT and other pesticides following World War II, the recent return of double-crested cormorants to near normal numbers is cause for celebration.
It was stunning. I had no idea what to expect from the cormorant colony, but it was just the most beautiful sight.
I was astounded at how social they are, how they pair bond, how faithful they are to each other, and how vocal they are.
I've studied them at colonies, and I've watched them in all parts of North America, and you look at a cormorant up close and they're actually very beautiful. Huge electric blue mouth lining, the orange gular sac that it has, jade green eyes, this beautiful green, blue bare skin around the eye ring. Just a stunning bird to look at.
Cormorants nest in the branches, and there's probably 5 to 10 nests per tree, and they're all paired up, and usually there's one cormorant on the nest incubating the eggs, and the other either is standing on the side beside them, or they head off on jaunts out to get nesting material, so they fly to the mainland, or they're out catching fish in the lake. It was just beautiful because it's quiet and peaceful except for the birds talking to each other, and there's a lot of almost camaraderie, it seems like, with the colony, and they all are just coexisting and going about their business.
The cormorants' comeback from near extinction is an unequivocal success story, but government agencies have recently come under pressure to implement management practices for the thriving birds.
Gradually, as the pressure came from extremist groups on the government to do something about the birds because they were blaming the birds for eating all of the fish in the lakes, the government started a management program which began in about year 2000 and started with blasting fire hoses into the nests of the cormorants, and then subsequently they moved into other harassment programs, egg oiling programs, and culling.
Dr. Richardson and several colleagues came to Presqu'ile Park to document the management program.
I had no idea what we might be preparing for. Oh my gosh. I can see the hunters. And all of a sudden we could see so many of the birds flushing up into the air. There was just sort of a huge cloud of black birds rising up, and we realized that they must have started shooting. It was absolutely horrific.
Well, the entire management program could be best described with one word, and that word's brutal. It was something that astounded me, the level of the cruelty involved in the entire management program, particularly the culling. The level of brutality, the level of cruelty really was quite unexpected.
I felt very strongly that the cormorants should not be culled, and that I was very concerned about the animal welfare issues that might happen. And so as a veterinarian, I wanted to be there. Oh yes, it's been shot right through. I think there's an entry hole here from a bullet just on the left abdominal side here where there's bleeding. Looks like a bullet wound, and then it's gone right through the bird and has come out this side, and it's nicked. Oh dear, I'll show you, Julie. Oh dear. Oh gosh. And it's hit its leg. So, I don't think the leg is repairable. No, it's not.
It's shattered though.
Yeah. But, yeah, I think it's, yeah, there's an exit hole here. So it's either gone up here, hit the leg, gone into the abdomen, and come out the other side. Not just wounding it and.
Cormorants have been persecuted throughout history, like loons, mergansers, and other fish-eating birds. But this time, the shocking manner in which thousands of these native birds have been massacred has provoked serious scrutiny.
Of course, the mass cruelty to the birds was of serious concern to a number of wildlife protection groups in the United States and Canada. And so we came together and formed Cormorant Defenders International in an effort to clarify all of the misinformation that was being spread about these birds.
We want to protect any fish-eating birds on either side of the Canada-U.S. border who are being oppressed and suppressed and persecuted. And we just basically work together to try and educate the public, but also, and this is very important, to document what's going on so that the public has an opportunity to understand.
The ministry shot this morning about 30 minutes on Friday, May 27th, and you can see that there are many, many injured birds.
See the dangling leg there, and dangling below the body is it. So clearly that leg is useless.
Here's another one on the shore. Made it on the shore, but it's dying too. I don't know how long it's going to survive. This is going to be a very gruesome day. A very gruesome day.
I saw many birds suffered terrible injuries. It was a terrible thing because of how long you knew that bird would suffer before it would finally die. What the cormorant will actually suffer through will be tremendous tissue damage and tremendous pain and swelling and bleeding. It will also be very anxious. The bird will be confused. It will be desperate to get back to its nest and the eggs and the partner. And with a wing broken, it cannot do anything. So it's got to be just sitting there. And that will cause great anxiety. And then fear, great fear, because obviously a cormorant's best method of defense and survival is flight, and it can't get off the ground. It'll try and get food, which it won't be able to do because it needs its wings for both flotation in the water and for diving down to get fish. And so it will probably starve to death.
Unfortunately, the public has mostly heard a negative perspective about cormorants. Much of the historical and scientific data is rarely, if ever, heard. And so many tenuous claims have led to the cruel condemnation of these native birds.
I think that people dislike cormorants and even in a way fear them. And I think it's because they honestly believe certain myths.
They don't belong here. They're not native.
It's quite clear that cormorants were present in the lake in some numbers in historical times.
McElraith discusses nesting cormorants in his book on ornithology in Ontario from 1886. So he knew of double-crested cormorants nesting in the Great Lakes Basin at that time. Certainly double-crested cormorants occur in the fossil record as well.
I think most of the people who are the critics of cormorants are of an age group that when they were growing up, cormorants were very rare. And they didn't see them, and they therefore didn't believe they belonged, because they simply formed their opinions at a time when cormorants were largely missing in action due to pesticide-related breeding failures. And now, as that particular environmental issue has been improved, and their breeding success increased, we're seeing much larger numbers of them. And there's a subset of people that are very disconcerted by that. But cormorants belong. They are a native bird. They are a native species. They've been around a long time, and they are a part of the Great Lakes ecosystem.
Their numbers are out of control.
They are not out of control, but where they are very, very conspicuous. And they are appearing in places where we don't remember seeing them when we were children.
When I started bird watching in the very early 70s, you were hard-pressed to see a double-crested cormorant on the Great Lakes. It was an event bird. And now I suspect these birds are just coming back to levels that were fairly similar to what would have been on before the Great Lakes Basin was settled.
In the case of cormorants booming, they are doing that because they're reflecting the ecology of the lake around them. There's an enormous population of small fish available for them to feed on.
In fact, all they are doing is responding to the what we call the carrying capacity, the ability of the water to support them. But you don't have the continued growth. It has to reach a peak and then level off. And studies right here in the province have shown that, in fact, the cormorants have leveled off.
These birds are eating all the fish.
The Canadian and U.S. governments have both vilified the birds and blamed them for many of the problems with the fishery, when in fact there are far more serious problems.
There's a problem, number one, that we've totally changed the composition of the fish species in the lakes in the 2 centuries since we've settled this area. We've taken out a lot of species by overfishing that were originally there. Number two, we've introduced competitors that are also making it very difficult for any of those species to rebound from the overfishing that was originally done. And so we've put in things like smelt, round gobies, and alewife unintentionally. And then intentionally, with our tax dollars, in fact, we've put in all kinds of non-native salmonids that are having a detrimental effect on species that are normally native in this ecosystem.
The cormorant may very well be of strong benefit to some native fish species by eliminating competing alien species that are now in the Great Lakes. And that would include the alewife and the round goby, some species of stickleback, for example, that are not native, and so on. But very, very few of the actual species of fish that either are of interest to fishermen, commercial or sport.
I think commercial fishermen, by and large, understand that they're not in direct competition or they're not losing out to the cormorant type of thing. But sports fishermen just haven't had the kind of public education to know that it's not the case. People's worry with them when they're in large numbers is that these things are just going to go to an area, exhaust the fish stocks, get up and leave the next year, go exhaust the next fish stock, go somewhere else, sort of basically moving around, exhausting things. Very few things that nest in dense colonies do that, and the reason is they're usually site tenacious, which means they keep coming back to the same site of their birth for generations. It's not in their interests evolutionarily to fish an area out. Particularly not if their strategy for breeding is to breed in the same place on an ongoing basis. So no, cormorants don't have the capacity to exhaust the fish stock of a place.
These birds are killing all the trees.
There's no question that double-crested cormorants can have negative impacts on local vegetation. Nobody disputes this. I mean, other species do too, so do great blue herons. But this is part of the natural system. This has been going on since these birds existed.
The accumulation of droppings over the years are very, very bad for vegetation at the time they're deposited. But all things change in nature, and where you may have a colony here 100 years from now, you may not have a colony, and you may have much enriched soil as a result of there having been, not just cormorants, but other water birds colonizing that island and being there.
In the Presqu'ile example again, there's 2 small woodlots on High Bluff. One of them is actually still alive and probably will remain so because the roots are in water. That dissipates the droppings and the burning effect it has on it. The dry woods is largely dead now. It's, I think, 13 hectares in size. And when you look at the total amount of habitat killed by nesting cormorants, we're talking tens of acres. We're not talking hundreds of acres or thousands of acres or thousands of miles of shoreline, as some groups claim. I mean, these things are really having a very limited impact. And yet it's causing us to spend something like $250,000 a year to try to keep these trees alive. So if the question is we're just trying to save the forest for the sake of a forest, it would be a lot more economical to go buy some woodlots on the mainland. You could save way more forest for a lot less money. But that isn't the way they're looking at it. And instead, we're just getting all focused on these birds killing trees, as if that's somehow not allowed. I mean, beavers kill trees. All sorts of things kill trees. We're not launching a war on all the other things that kill trees.
They're pushing all the other birds out.
What we find is that cormorants and herons coexist. Presqu'ile is a good example. The cormorants came first, and it was only after they were there that herons, although there's lots of good heron habitat around there, decided to go in where the cormorants were.
I personally think the cormorants were the sort of the impetus to draw the herons into nesting on the island. At least the great blues and great egrets, both of which have only been there since the late 90s.
I've seen cormorants all over North America in colonies with everything from snowy egrets to great egrets to black-crowned night herons to roseate spoonbills, glossy ibis, in ground nesting colonies where they nest on the ground with all kinds of species of gulls, terns, including some of the very rare terns. In no situation have I ever seen these having such a negative impact on any of these other types of co-colonial species that they've nested in proximity to the point where it's become a biodiversity or a conservation issue. Double-crested cormorants and these species have all co-evolved, and so cormorants don't put any inordinate pressure on any of the species they coexist with in colonies that A, isn't natural, and B, that the species can't cope with. No one can point to an example of a species that's been brought into conservation concern because they use similar habitat to double-crested cormorant. It's just not possible.
One of the worst things, they're polluting the water.
Very locally, in very small areas where you get a large colony, right near that colony, no one's going to dispute that right underneath the colony you're not going to have a problem with species. But that's true of all colonial birds. Are we to wipe out or cull every species of colonial bird that's defecating in a lake?
All birds and all animals who live in water defecate in the water, including fish, beavers, muskrats, including herons, gulls, terns, ducks, geese, grebes. I mean, it's just the list is enormous, and yet we single out this one species without any real evidence that they do any harm.
If we can have a colony of 60,000 ring-billed gulls, 10,000 pairs of double-crested cormorants, and 1,000 pairs of black-crowned night herons here in Toronto, and it not create any problem in close proximity to our water intake for the drinking water of 4 million people, then I think it's not a very good argument to say that these things are closing beaches and they're ruining water quality.
One myth in particular is perhaps the most problematic of all. It is the idea that pouring tax dollars into the management of cormorants will somehow force nature into better balance.
We keep going in with this idea that we know what we're doing and it's going to either fix things or make it more the way we want it. And to me, it's only causing more devastation and destruction.
I think the biggest threat is in trying to change the natural process in a colony. This is a colonial bird grouping. You won't find a colonial bird grouping anywhere in the world that is constant or static. And yet the ministry have just obsessed about how we've got to get in there, get the cormorants out of the trees, to save the herons, which are nesting in the trees. But how do you go into a mixed species colony and selectively scare out only the cormorants, particularly when the herons are more nervous than the cormorants are? When the management program began, all 3 species of herons, black-crowned night heron, great egret, and great blue, were at their highest recorded levels ever at Presqu'ile, and their numbers were increasing continually up until every year until the cormorant management started. Great blue herons, even by the ministry's numbers, are in decline now. The black crowns are being moved around to substandard areas. These management activities have caused more harm to the herons than any number of cormorants have caused.
Other aspects of the management plan that involved the personnel going into the bird colonies to oil eggs or to disrupt birds or to bang out nests in the trees were disruptive to all of the species that were in the area, not just the cormorants. When the colonies were entered, hundreds and hundreds of birds would circle up into the sky and fly out over the water in a very panicked state. From the point of view of a park, which is supposed to be a protected area and a pristine area, you just don't want any of these effects of disturbance. You want the area to remain in a natural state, and it can't when you're having people track through on foot or with their ATVs or along the shore in their power boats. The entire program, in my view, was extremely cruel, extremely disruptive, and extremely unnecessary, particularly the culling.
I guess as a veterinarian, I have to accept certain things about society, and I think our society has decided it's okay to use animals and to kill animals, but we've been very clear in both the Criminal Code and the Ontario SPCA Act that if we're going to kill the animals, we have to do it humanely. And really, to kill an animal humanely means that you need to do it quickly and painlessly. The cormorant cull is anything but that. The vast majority of them would either drown or bleed to death. Neither of those methods of killing are considered humane.
Very few of the injured birds were retrieved by the people who were doing the management program, the Ministry of Natural Resources. So we found many birds 5, 6, sometimes 7 days after the shooting has occurred, still alive, floating in the water, huddled on the shore or in other locations. And we had placed many, many calls to the Ministry of Natural Resources asking them to pick up these birds, giving them the exact locations of many of these birds, and they were never picked up.
There's injured birds in the water. Are you gonna go get them? I can show you where they are. This bird is injured. We just saw him crawl to shore. We told them about these injured birds, but they declined to save them.
In the end, we were compelled to go out and care for those animals ourselves. In many cases, we captured injured birds that were starving to death after days of being injured, and we would return those animals to shore and take them to a veterinarian to be humanely euthanized.
Ironically, while management programs target cormorants and disrupt other nesting species, another deadly enemy in the Great Lakes environment is threatening the birds.
There's a real problem out here that's affecting cormorants, loons, grebes, mergansers, and on islands in Lake Ontario, they're finding thousands of dead cormorants annually killed by botulism, and yet this isn't being factored in at all into the management strategy.
Certainly it would be better use of our government taxpayer dollars to be studying what's doing this than to be using that money on cormorant management.
The Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and similar agencies in the U.S. haven't considered the effects of botulism, to which cormorants seem to be very susceptible. They're top of the food chain, which means that they bioaccumulate toxins that are in the environment. Many species have gone extinct following a period when they were super abundant, and large numbers are not a guarantee or a protection or a hedge against actual full extinction.
We're basically just revisiting history. The government 60 years ago allowed culling to go on at a time when the bird was just on the precipice of having this huge drop due to DDT. And we nearly wiped the cormorant out.
You know, it may be 10 years from now we're trying to save cormorants on the Great Lakes again.
It's such a web of life, and they don't seem to understand that you can't just go and plug out the strands and have it work still. And so we keep going in with this idea that we know what we're doing and it's going to either fix things or make it more the way we want it. And to me, it's only causing more devastation and destruction. I think nature is so much better at managing than we ever could be. So I think we should stop the cormorant cull. I think we should stop the whole cormorant management plan. I do not believe it's needed.
I know the Ministry of Natural Resources have to work between competing camps, if you like, or differing views. But I do expect them to come out with the correct information, and they have been just silent. Whenever this misinformation wave comes up, they have completely failed to get out in front of it and put out any corrective information, and I think that's a real tragedy.
The science is on the side of Cormorant Defenders International, and we're looking at all the information that we find that is available. And what it has taught us is that cormorants are native to this region. They are not depleting fish stocks. They are not harming herons. They are not a serious threat to the quality of the water and the environment. They are native. They belong. They're recovering. They aren't growing out of control. In fact, their populations have leveled off, and they will level off where left alone.
Cormorants are one in a very long list of species that have been persecuted for the wrong reasons. And I think that somebody has to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, and you've got to stop.
If you agree that the cruelty in cormorant management has got to stop, here is what you can do. Learn about the plight of waterbirds in the Great Lakes Basin and stay informed on the issues. Contact your elected representatives and urge them to ensure that in their jurisdiction, cormorants and all native waterbirds are protected. And support organizations that are calling on every level of government to protect cormorants.